This is Rick Harnish. I'm the Executive Director of the High Speed Rail Alliance here in Chicago, Illinois. We've got with us today Chris Ott, Deputy Director up in Madison.
Hi, everyone.
I'll be giving the presentation, and Chris will be managing the question box. So if you have a question, put it in the question box. If you have a discussion point, put it in the chat. Uh, um, and I want to point out, for those who haven't seen it before, in the background there is our new Michigan Central poster. As we think big about stations across the country, we need to think about high-speed rail and what we do with existing assets and make them work better. So um, if you want a new poster, we don't have a direct link anymore. So I'm selling something you can't get. Send us an email. Go to our website, hit the info button, and tell us you want a poster. We'll get you one. We're the High Speed Rail Alliance. For those who don't know us, we are a member-supported nonprofit. So we are helping people like you understand better what high-speed rail is, what regional rail is, what railways can do in general for the country, what steps can be taken in order to make railways truly effective in this country, and how you can help influence that process, especially in your state capital and in Washington, D.C. So we've been around for about 30 years, and it's been a very productive 30 years, and I hope we'll start to see a lot more growth in the next 4. Today's topic is Chicago Union Station, which is at the center of the country, and we'll go ahead and get started with that. So Union Station is pretty critical to functioning for the whole country. We have trains from here to all of the coast, so it serves directly to 36 states, and then significant Midwest service and service within the metro area of Chicago. We have for a long time thought this should be the start and the center of high-speed rail across the country, and we think it's really critical to get it really improved in order to make a national high-speed railway program work. Back in, let's just say 10 years ago, 13, 14 years ago, we did a lot of work into understanding what would be needed to make it truly effective, what was possible. It was at the same time that the city of Chicago was doing the same kind of work. And so through that process, we learned a lot. And one of the things that came out of this is this diagram to envision a station that can handle at least 10 times as many people as what is being handled at the station today. I think that's a reasonable number to shoot for in a short period of time. And that is our goal. So this is a vision. It's not the solution. It's one idea on how to get the process started. But I think it's a pretty credible one. And given the importance of this facility, not only to the city and the region, the Midwest region, and the country, I think it's reasonable to think this big. So why are we doing this? So we believe, I in my heart know, that if we get a lot more people on trains and buses, our cities will be financially healthier. They will be physically healthier because you're not spending a lot of money and resources on where to put your 2-ton mobility device. And walking is healthier for people in general. And as you get buildings closer together, because you don't have parking lots, you don't have to put as much pipe in the ground for utilities and wires and safety and all of those things. But it's really about making it easier for people to connect face to face more often, because that's when the important stuff happens, when you're there face to face. Whether it's a business deal that goes better because you can understand each other better, whether it's staying in touch with your family, whether it's going to the school that really makes you shine as a college student, whatever it is, the easier we can make it for travel, the more productive and more prosperous our cities and even the countryside will be. But if we're going to have those benefits, we have to think on really steep growth curves, which unfortunately, right now, most of the projects, we're really excited about the corridor ID program. We've done some work on explaining what that is, but it's a new pipeline for getting projects started and working them through the federal funding process that was established in the last several years. We're really excited that there are 69 projects across the country that are in that program. That's a great start. We need to get that program expanded, and we need to get just about all of the sponsors of those thinking about a much steeper growth curve than they are today. But I don't think that's unreasonable to think about, because if you look at the Capitol Corridor over there in 1992, when it started with 4 trains a day, controlled by the state DOT, it was doing okay, but not great. And the DOT proposed cutting it from 4 trains a day to 3 in order to save costs. Fortunately, the communities decided to take it over. They got a new law passed in Sacramento that allowed them to take the corridor over and manage it on they still get state support, but they're in charge of managing it and the buses that connect to it. And they hired a guy named Gene Skoropowski, and he did some important things. One is, he said, we are going to grow steadily the number of frequencies, and here is the long-term plan for growing those frequencies, and got agreement from the railroad up front on the long-term plan. The next is, he worked with the railroad to understand what their true needs were and how to make it a business for them instead of an obligation. And then 3, they executed on that plan steadily over time. And there's a lot of details that they did that we've been trying to highlight over the last several weeks in a blog series, but they did create a massive increase in growth. And I believe that in the Midwest, we have many routes that have this opportunity. So if we look at the current status of planning and existing operations, all of the existing Amtrak operations, in my view, have the potential to grow at this rate. Because except for Chicago to St. Louis, which is okay, but about half of what it should be. Chicago to Milwaukee, again, okay, but about half of what it should be. And in Detroit is really a third of what it should be. Those are huge growth opportunities right there. But then you've got routes that don't have any real service at all that are really big, like Chicago to Indianapolis, Chicago to Cincinnati, Chicago to St. Paul, Green Bay, Madison isn't even on in a direct route. So we've got the yellow lines, which the FRA, for the most part, except for the Omaha line, has said there should be 16 to 25 trains a day. You've got the blue lines, which in my view should be planned for at least a train every 2 hours, and in many cases every hour. And then some purple lines that I think are missing from the map. But for example, the Grand Rapids to Detroit, Michigan has started studying that one. Traverse City to Ann Arbor is got planning money. And Dubuque should be in there, and a direct route to Madison should be in there. So there is a huge potential to grow. But we have to plan for that growth, and we have to start thinking about what does that growth mean for all of the facilities, and really start thinking bigger about what they're going to be and how we're going to pay for it, not on a piecemeal basis, but on a real basis. And right now, we're hoping to move the process in the Midwest significantly forward during the 2025 legislative session, and we'll have some more work on that to come. So I just wanted to start off with imagining in short order 10 times as many people coming to or going through Chicago by train than is what's happening today. I think it's a reasonable expectation in a period of 5 to 10 years and is what we should be pushing for as we're pushing the federal government and our state governments to keep this process accelerating. I just enjoy this. At some point, I'm going to do the entire boundary of O'Hare and compare it to downtown. But this is the layout of the current terminals compared to our major railway stations in downtown Chicago. I find it interesting that Union Station and Ogilvie are closer together than one end of the B concourse at O'Hare. Certainly, there aren't a lot of people transferring here. And I think one of the reasons that air market share is so low in short distance markets like 300 miles and below is because airports are so spread out. So there's two things I want to get away from this that seem contradictory. One is it's probably okay to have trains coming into multiple different stations in Chicago. But the other is it's possible to have multiple entrances to connected train stations so that if you know which place you need to go, you can go directly there. But part of the advantage of that is you can get directly down to your platform, and that's going to come up in this future discussion. So just an interesting comparison of the scale of railway stations versus airports. So I'm really happy that Amtrak has been pushing forward to really make some significant improvements to the Chicago area in a program that they're calling CHIP, or the Chicago Hub Improvement Program. One of them is new shop facilities, and they have requested federal funding. The application went in December, and we need to push hard on the feds to actually fund these projects that they have requested funding for. So one of them is a new yard complex on the south side of Chicago. This is very much needed, especially if we're going to achieve that growth rate that I'm talking about. The other is that they are looking at a replacement for the bridge over the south branch of the river. This got stuck for several weeks a couple of years ago. It desperately needs to be replaced. It's challenged because it's too low to the river. So you can't replace it at the same level. It's also a landmark, so you probably can't take it down. So it's going to be a challenging project and one that needs a lot of ongoing grassroots support in order to move it forward. It's a very critical project, and so we're very happy that Amtrak is really serious about getting this bridge replaced and or fixed and supplemented. So those are the two things that they're looking to move forward that are connected to Union Station but aren't directly connected. So part of a package that we need to be advocating for as a region and across the country. So a couple of things that are underway at Union Station. One that's incredibly important, and to be clear about where this came from, in the city of Chicago's master plan that they put together about a decade ago, this was the proposal. This is not exactly what's moving forward, but very close. So Union Station was built with alternating, have I got this right? Yellow, right? So alternating passenger freight platforms. And a project that is underway is to remove two of the freight platforms and widen the passenger platforms. And that right now, during rush hour, these platforms can be unsafe. It's really important to figure out how to get people off those platforms faster in an emergency. So again, this is not what they're moving forward with, but in essence, it is. So that's really an exciting project that we're glad of that progress. The other thing they're working to do is change the ventilation system so that the smoke gets the diesel exhaust. And if there should be a fire, the smoke would get out of this area as quickly as possible. So that again is an important safety program that they have applied for federal funds to continue working on. And then part of the challenge is these platforms are going to be coming out of service. So where do you put the trains that serve those? They need to roll down to here, which means the trains that are on these platforms need to go someplace else. And there's a really interesting opportunity with the old mail platform that's underneath the two post offices. The old one that was built in the 20s and the newer one that was built in the 80s/90s. And that's this platform here in green. So we'll be talking more about that in the station annex discussion. But very happy that there is progress happening on these critical issues. And we need to continue to push to have this progress not only accelerate, but look at bigger goals. Instead of doubling service by 2040, increasing ridership, instead of doubling ridership by 24, doubling ridership, going 10 times more in 5 years. So I'm sorry, and we don't have good language about that on the website. Clearly, we need to come up with a better way of saying that. I would be bold if I were truly thinking that that this country was as serious about high-speed rail as we are about airports. I want to point out that we funded as a city through federal money and also backstopped with as my real estate taxes, bonds, a massive expansion at O'Hare that lasted about a decade, and now we're in the process of beginning the second 10 plus or minus $1 billion expansion at O'Hare. In that first expansion, there was a row of brand new warehouses on Irving Park Avenue. They were brand new. They're just a couple of years old. The city bought them, tore them down, and moved Irving Park Avenue. So part of the challenge on getting Union Station to work properly is some of the buildings are really in the way. So one potential that has not been discussed, I want to make sure it hasn't, we know it hasn't been discussed. People might think it's a crazy idea, but I would take the two buildings down that are over these tracks here and the buildings down here and figure out, and I don't know if it's feasible, it's just an idea, but maybe we can make a true through running station in this area here and phase it in. I don't know, it's an interesting idea, but let's look at what's more in terms of things that the city and Amtrak have talked about, and what could work without taking a lot of buildings down. And so we've come to the conclusion that there's 5 things. One is you really have to fix the concourse, and we'll talk more about each of these later. The other is we need a direct entrance, what we're calling the station annex, to the mail platforms. I think that's very critical. 3 is there are through tracks, but there's a number of investments that need to be made so that you can easily run the trains through the station practically. The 4th is making Ogilvy and Union stations seem like one station with a direct connection, and train departure boards in both places that have track numbers for both, in so that you could come into the Great Hall in Union Station and look up and say, oh, my next train to Milwaukee is out of track N2. I'm sorry, these are odds, as on the north side, or, oh, my next train to Milwaukee is out of Ogilvy. And then the 5th is we really need to get serious about electrifying our busiest railways in general. And it's a really important, and it's possible to begin that by phasing in electrification at Union Station. So those are the 5. And I will start to go through each of those in turn. But first, let's talk about how we got where we are. So the original sin at Union Station was the original design, which had a separate head house building, which is the building that you know of today, that again, in part because of our advocacy, has the ticket counters in it. It has the lounges. It's still the main waiting facility. Um, it's it's a really cool facility that I'm glad is still open to the public use. Um, but there was a companion building called the Concourse that was where the actual business of finding your train, connecting between trains happened. And that's this building in the foreground. Um, and uh, it was torn down in 1967. So the Pennsylvania Railroad needed to make its books look healthy. So they sold the space over Penn Station, New York, and over this station here in order to balance their books so they could do an ill-fated merger with New York Central. And that's so the first problem was in the 20s, they designed the station wrong because they designed it as two stub end terminals instead of one through station. And here's the original floor plan, and you can see the train tracks coming in. And you've got this big area here, though, where you can get off one train and easily figure out if you're connecting to another train, where that train was. And because this isn't it isn't a through station, that's a really important function that needs to remain. So imagine if you're coming in from Detroit. Maybe some of the trains from Detroit go through to O'Hare, but maybe not all of them do. But you need to get to O'Hare. You need to be able to quickly and easily find that connecting train that gets you out to O'Hare or to Milwaukee or some other place. So we believe that a lot of the trains run through, but there always will need to be the need to connect. So you need this kind of big open area. This is what it looked like from the inside. And you can see that again, it was just a very big open area for most of its life until 1967. So that leads us to the first kind of important fix is we need a new concourse. Now, Amtrak started working on that prior to essentially to keep it about 5 to 10 years ago. They started working on developing a new concourse. And then that project was put on hold. But they, again, are pushing to move it forward. I've been doing a lot of planning work on that over the last couple of years. And essentially, that building that I just showed you was replaced by this very interesting modernistic building, which is not that big of a problem because it only has 6 big columns going down. So that's not a problem for getting people to function. This white building, getting the station to function properly, this white building over here is. And here we can see, and this is not the current floor plan, but very close. You can see this column line here that really, and other columns as well, that are getting in the way of through passengers moving through. But again, I want to point out there are 2 existing through tracks here that could be better utilized. So Amtrak has a really cool idea, which is to gut that green building that I talked about, and then make it open to the sunlight and have a really good high-class lounge above on the floor above. That's a pretty interesting idea. I'm not against it. But again, does that get us to 10 times the number of people coming through this station? I'm not sure that it does. Maybe it does. But one of the things we need to do is ensure that this planning process and public, and at some point they're going to need to make it a public process, We need to make sure that they can continue that planning process. And that's what we need to support the planning money that they've got around moving this concourse idea forward. So that's progress. We need to push for more progress, but we do have good progress. And again, looking at a different angle, not saying this is the right way, but if we're gonna think that the train travel to Chicago and through Chicago is important, we need to think bold and something that really celebrates that. So this is one idea of how that might be achieved. The second of our ideas is the station annex. So I talked earlier about this mail platform being converted for use as passenger train for passengers. And that process is underway. I would like to see something added to that, which is a direct entrance down to that platform so that people who are, at least the people who are regular passengers, you could have on your ticket that says, you know, the station and the place you need to go is the station annex, right? And so maybe the tracks out of here are S tracks, tracks out of here are N tracks, uh, tracks out of Ogilvy are O tracks, and these are something else, A tracks, right? So that on the departures board, you know where you need to go. And you can get into here directly if you know for sure that that's where your train's going to be departing out of. I think this is a very important fix. Part of the challenge again is these buildings. And is there the political muscle to figure out how to modify these buildings in order to make the station work? And again, we need to build a lot more political support in order to make that happen. So that's the station annex. Here's why I think this is so important. Today, as far as I understand, now I want to be clear on all of this. I could be wrong if I'm representing something that Amtrak is doing, but as I understand it, you will need to come in perhaps through the Great Hall, certainly into the concourse area. You'll need to queue up here and then walk out on across these tracks, which because now they're using that as that, it makes it difficult to use those regularly as through tracks, through this narrow choke point, and perhaps as far away down as this end under the new post office. So in my view, this adds 15 minutes of travel time, 15 minutes of travel time. Now, I don't think that's an acceptable thing that they're doing. They do that regularly at airports. You know, they continue to make these facilities bigger. And again, I think that's part of the reason they're losing market share on short distance flights. Certainly, if you're taking a train to Kankakee, you don't want to add 15 minutes to a trip that's essentially less than an hour, or an hour and a half trip up to Milwaukee. So I think it's urgent that we figure out how to make this entrance a reality. There's essentially a number of places it could be. It could be from the lobby of the new post office. It could be from the south end of the old post office, from the north end, or it could be from underneath 300 South Riverside. I don't have a specific idea. I've got an opinion about it should be under the over here. But we need to really amp up the pressure to make this happen at the city and state level, because I think it's really urgent to keep the service growing at the rate that it can grow. To give a better idea of what this is like, so here's the walkway that you will come across in order to get this platform, and then walk down. This is Van Buren Street, and then you can see where the train boarding area begins down here. One of the entrances could be underneath 300 South Riverside. And there's a very interesting proposal some of our volunteers have put together for how you could make this function truly as an Amtrak concourse for all Amtrak trains. And that would involve, again, the city back 10 years ago came up with an idea of extending this track out into the river and then bringing it in. And I'm not really clear where it comes in down here. so that this platform could come farther down into it. And then eventually, preferably, you would end up having two platforms with 4 tracks down there. And then they would all come together to come underneath here. But kind of zooming into that, you can see that the platform itself is about half under the post office and half under a plaza. So there seems to me to be an opportunity here that we need to explore more, but we need to get, again, the state to ramp up its passenger planning and really figure out how to make this work. So we continue to need to push to build political support for the Union Station project. It's already underway. Political support for making it bigger and bolder, all throughout the region and every route that comes into Chicago. So this is one view of that idea of using the 300 building as a way to access the platforms below. I really want to thank Alan, who did the basic writing of this proposal, and Victor from Poland, who did the architectural designs. So that is the item number 2, the station annex. And as I talked about, that 300 South idea came from essentially this drawing here that's contained in the master plan document. Probably, in my opinion, you would have to extend this track further out into the river. I don't know. But then it opens up an interesting idea about having access here, which then makes it possible to have direct access into the concourse. But again, we have to start thinking bigger and bolder in order to move these things forward. The second is we need to get through running. There's a challenge with balancing. There's a lot more routes coming into the south side than going out the north end. But the tracks are there. You need to get reliability up a lot, because you don't want to mess up the reliability of Chicago to Milwaukee by having the trains from Detroit coming in there. And if the Detroit train is late, then the inbound Detroit train is late, then the outbound Milwaukee train is late. So we've got to get a better reliability on the service. So it's not just about the station, but there's infrastructure work and systematic work that needs to happen to make through running work. But that's one way, because you've got trains spending a lot less time in the station to improve capacity dramatically. The other challenge is the best 2 routes out of the north don't go to Union Station. They go to Ogilvie. And as we pointed out at the beginning, they're really close together. The challenge is they don't seem close together because you have to go outside, you have to brave traffic, and you have to brave the weather, which can not be pleasant. So let's do a simple thing and connect the 2. And again, in each station, have train departures boards, so one person can go to each of those places, or in this case, in my proposal, 3 places, see a departure board and go, I am in the right place, there's my track, or I'm not in the right place, I need to go to one of the other 2 places. So this one to me seems easy, but it gets into the governance problems that we have with so many things that seems to be easy. Who owns this? Is it Metra, which controls Ogilvie Station? Is it the city, which controls the streets? Is it Amtrak, which owns and controls Union Station? Who benefits the most out of that and takes the lead on it? It's a little bit challenging in terms of the actual connection, though we know that it's possible. So number 4 seems to be easy. Connect Ogilvie and Union Station together as one. Now, this is important whether or not we have longer distance trains in the European definition of long distance trains leaving out of Ogilvie, because you've got hundreds of trains coming into Ogilvie every day with people on those that need to connect to Transit Union Station. So this should be a priority as an easy win. In our Crossrail Chicago proposal, we talk more about the long term, which I think we should start developing right now, of how we create electrified tracks through Union Station to a couple of key points. That's the line there in purple. In highway terms, that's a reasonable sized project. In what people are used to thinking about in railway terms, it's pretty hard to do, but it is very doable. Um, but we also have this challenge in the best pathways for passenger trains into the city don't go to Union Station. So kind of going around counterclockwise, the easiest way to add passenger trains to Milwaukee is to rebuild the Union Pacific from Kenosha up, add some capacity enhancements from Kenosha South to the UP Metro line, Metro North line, and start running hourly trains to Milwaukee. Again, it's an easy project in terms of highway projects, but you need to have people going to Ogilvie instead of Union Station. The shortest pathway to Madison, again, on a route that has almost no freight trains, and it has so few trade trains that a piece of it's embargoed. It's still legally a railway, but it's embargoed. It would be less than 2 hours with a fairly slow train operating at a top speed of 80 miles an hour. No freight trains on it. You should be able to go faster than 2 hours to, connect two really important economic centers and learning centers together with a 2 hour trip every hour. So that's an exciting opportunity, but it takes looking at Union Station differently as being a bigger complex, not just the station itself. And at the south side, we've got the same problems where the best line in from Joliet goes to LaSalle Street, and then the best line in from the south goes into Randolph Street. But again, if we're talking about rapidly expanding service, uh, we need to kind of work through that and figure out how to start making those connections later. And I will point out that Amtrak and the FRA are designing, unfortunately, they haven't made much of that work public. They are starting design work on a dedicated passenger main that would head to the east called the South of the Lake Reroute that would start at Union Station. And again, that's one of those things we need to continue to build grassroots support for fixing Chicago in general, because it has an impact on so much across the entire country. So just pointing out one of the reasons why we need to start thinking about the UP North is because there's this section on the route that Amtrak trains take today, which is incredibly difficult to add capacity to. It's that circled section there. And so in my view, we need to keep the existing service we have. Wisconsin's close to getting 8 trains a day. Let's make that happen, perhaps 10. But to get to hourly service, we really need to find a different way. And in my view, that's the UP North line. And then it's a similar kind of thing going to Madison, which I talked about out of order, which is, I can't believe this is not on people's radar screen because it's so easy to do. But we need to get the state of Wisconsin and the state of Illinois to start taking this seriously. So the last but not least is electrification. So Union Station was actually designed to have high-level boarding and electrification. But the train design that Metra uses, the superliners that Amtrak has, and the Metra gallery cars take up much of the space that was designed for the electrification. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to squeeze that in there. But you can do it probably if you have a 1500 volt DC wire. And we'll have a whole nother blog some other day. It's on my wish list of blogs about how electrification works. But Metra already runs trains under a 1500 DC wire. The advantage, one of the disadvantages to that is there's a lot more capital infrastructure on the ground because the transformers to get down to 1500 volts are on the ground. With most electrification systems, the transformer is in the train. Um, but the advantage is that it's fairly easy with the new Siemens Charger locomotives to just add a pantograph if the power is clean off the wire, to add a pantograph to the locomotive. And then because the chargers have a diesel generator that's generating high voltage AC, which then gets turned into 1500 DC, you can just skip that step and have it come straight off the wire. EMD locomotives have, I think, 1800 volts, but that is still true. And then it's interesting for high-speed trains, most of them, they have transformers that convert it to 1500 DC, and then they convert it back to AC to actually run the traction motors. So most high-speed trains actually are using, at some point in that discussion, 1500 DC. So if we focus on 1500 DC at Union Station, that probably makes it easier. Unfortunately, nobody's really looked at it. We think that's true, but we need to get that process started. The other advantage of this is the way that Amtrak has come upon to get the diesel exhaust out of the station, puts it out into the river. The fewer diesel locomotives that we have in that station, the better off we are. Happy that Metra's looking at, actually is buying some test electric train sets, which will help a lot. The Tier 4 locomotives help a lot. But we really need to get to electrification for many reasons, not just the air quality in the station. And then there's another interesting approach to this, which is the train sets that Amtrak is purchasing for the Northeast Corridor. The ones that will go down into Virginia will have the transformers actually in the first coach attached to the locomotive. That's what's pictured up on the front. And the trains coming from upstate New York, because there's just a short stretch where they can't run the diesel, will actually have a battery in that car. So again, the point of this is we need to start thinking about Union Station electrification. And to get that started now, we don't have to necessarily believe that we'll have wires all the way to Milwaukee, to Madison, to Detroit, to Indianapolis, to Cincinnati, and St. Louis. We should have electric wires all that way, but we don't have to do it to get started. So that's the last. Those are the 5 things that I think we need to push the state of Illinois, because this is in the state, hard on getting done. Push the new administration hard on getting this stuff done. If we want to be a big infrastructure administration, if that's what the administration wants to be, this is a place to do that. And so there's some really exciting work that we can do, but we really need to keep building the grassroots coalition across at least the states that are within about 400 miles of Chicago on all of those corridor ID projects, but even further. And I'm very happy that Amtrak was able to engage support for their applications from as far away as South Dakota. We, as members of the Alliance, can help keep building that support. So it's not just about Chicago, it's about one anchor of every corridor in the Midwest, even Duluth to Minnesota, because people will want to go from Duluth to Chicago. And hopefully someday those trains will go through as opposed to just stopping in Minneapolis. So as we move forward, we will have a continued discussion about ideas about what to fix there. And we will also have action alerts and other ideas about how you can help keep this project accelerating and moving forward as we push Washington and Springfield and other states to continue to grow at a very rapid rate their railway programs moving forward. So you can stay in touch with these things by going to fixunionstation.com. Share that with many people. Sign the petition so that we know you want to be engaged, and we can keep you engaged as we go. So thank you again for joining today. I went a little long, but we've got 15 minutes for questions. Where's the stop share button? And Chris, do we have any exciting questions?
We sure do. There's lively discussion and lots of questions. I'm kind of organizing them, hopefully, in a good thematic way. But there are a few sort of basic detail questions that I thought would help to clear up first. Fred asks, will the high-level annex platform stay at that height or be demolished and lowered for ground level boarding?
Oh, that's an important question with a good answer, which is they will stay high level. So currently, all the trains to the east, so New York, um, Washington, Detroit, and all of the Midwest run trains are 48-inch high floors. So that gets us much closer to level boarding. So that's a big step in the right direction.
Okay. Someone else asks, is the current construction on the south platforms of Union Station related to this platform expansion?
Um, so I don't know specifically, but to be more generic, I think it's mostly about replacing the bridge. The Canal Street is actually a bridge over Union Station facilities. And so I'm not sure what the status is of the block between Adams and Jackson, but last time I was there, they were still working on that. And they've started the construction on Canal Street between Jackson and Van Buren.
Okay. Also, Rick, you already welcomed people who might be new to the High-Speed Rail Alliance, and this question might come from someone who is new. We definitely do welcome that. The question is, at what speed does train service become high-speed rail?
I'm sorry for being snarky, but at what quality does a painting become art? Um, so, you know, um, there is clearly a break point, a tipping point at about 2.5 hours, where people will definitely switch from driving or flying to taking the train at 2.5 hours. For a destination like um, uh, Detroit or Cincinnati or St. Louis from Chicago, you have to average 150 miles an hour. Um, but if you look on the web, you'll never get a clear definition of what high speed is. The most generous is a train that I definitely want to ride, and it probably has to be half the speed of driving in order to be a train that most people will want to ride. So sorry for the bad answer. It's easy. I like the fact that Congressman Moulton is really hammering home on 186 miles an hour and above. We need to have really core lines that are that fast at least. So sorry for the long answer.
And I think you meant half the travel time of driving, not the speed of driving, right?
I meant half the travel time. So
Yeah,
if it's
okay.
a 5 hour drive, 2.5 hours
Yeah,
is the
so
time you got to beat.
okay, great. Ray asks, alongside the talk about better rail connections for O'Hare, what about better connections between Union Station and Midway?
So I believe that that's very important. Um, it's even more challenging than O'Hare. So I think it's important, but um, not a lot of talk has happened about
Mhm. Okay. Roger asks, has Amtrak scheduled any public engagement on Chicago Union Station improvements?
it. In my opinion, they have not. And I think we need to push them to have public engagement. And I think they're getting close to stages in the environmental process where they're going to need to.
Hmm. Okay. This comment or comments come from another Ray. We have a few people with overlapping names today, but Ray says it's important to keep the assisted boarding lounge in an easy to find, prominent location. For people who are blind, that's really important. And he says there also needs to be an inside location to catch connecting buses from Union Station, where passengers can be protected from the weather and have access to things like restrooms and refreshments. Do you have anything more to say, Rick, on either of those topics, accessibility or intercity buses?
So on accessibility, absolutely. Um, I'm a little not clear on what the plans are around on that, but absolutely, that is absolutely true. In terms of indoor bus connections, unfortunately, the city missed the bus. Um, and they had an opportunity to do it. They missed it. And it's unfortunate. One person suggested shutting down part of Canal Street from auto traffic in order to have the bus station on Canal Street. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. Um, right now, one of our projects is to keep the existing station open. So the city was actually working with Greyhound to figure out how to get Greyhound on curbside service instead of at their station. I hope we've persuaded them to not pursue curbside service anymore. I'm not sure, but we've got to at least keep the existing station open. And I think that that should be purchased by the city or an authority, like an airport authority, and operated as an airport, the same function as an airport would have for buses.
Okay. And I'm glad you brought up airports again, because I probably should have asked this one alongside the Midway question. Chris asks, how likely are we to see a Union Station to O'Hare express train, and then a connection from there to McCormick Place or a potential new lakefront stadium?
So Metra is actively engaged in planning for Union Station and or Ogilvy to O'Hare. It's similar to Union Station. We're really happy that the work has started, and we need to build a much stronger case for putting more money into it than they think is available. A core problem with it that needs to be solved and really needs city involvement is the existing people mover connection to the existing metro station is unsafe. I almost got hit by a car trying that walk once. And actually looking for the unsafe intersection, I didn't see it until the car almost hit me. Um, so that's in the process. We need to push on it harder, which goes back to this grassroots campaign across the Midwest to get states to start amping up their spending on that. And I will add, isn't it interesting to think about Madison to O'Hare um, as a direct service? And that makes the O'Hare station even more valuable.
Speaking as someone in Madison, I sure agree.
Yes.
Um, and speaking of people movers, there's been lots of interest in the chat about people movers between between Chicago Union Station and Ogilvy. And Ellen asks about another possibility. Instead of walkways and people movers between the stations, could some kind of shuttles work instead?
Um, I don't have the answer. Yes, certainly they should look at shuttles. Um, uh, we had a proposal 15 years ago that was fun about a new streetcar that would connect the Michigan Avenue to all the railway stations and all of them together. I still think that's a good idea, some sort of people mover. The Central Area Committee had a people mover proposal essentially on the same route. Again, we've got to get the city, the state, the feds truly engaged in thinking about how we get people around without cars.
We've got lots more questions. Probably can't get to them all, but let's keep going. Scott asks, is there any consideration of changing Union Station from two stub end terminals to be fully through running, connecting both sides? He says Boston has to spend billions to tunnel a mile and a half between North and South Station, but in Chicago, you just need to lay a track across a waiting room to achieve the same thing.
Um, so during the Chicago master plan process, we had some volunteers who put together a draft design of what it would take to connect the south tracks to the north tracks. And because the tracks don't line up, it really doesn't work. Um, especially if you're not willing to tear down a bunch of buildings. And then you end up with really ridiculously long platforms. Um, so the master plan process did look at a full through running station. They did not include it in one of their options. We actually had drawings that we published and are happy to share quietly with folks of what that would look like. I then came to the conclusion that the answer is to take down the two green buildings and to South Riverside and start from scratch on the north end. But again, nobody looked at that. And sometimes I don't like saying it out loud because that's crazy? Three buildings you want to take down? But yeah, I would wish that somebody would actually look into that.
Okay. Is there any chance of structural work to remove the columns that are restricting through service?
There has been some work done on that. I don't know the details. But essentially, the idea is if you turn what we're calling the station annex into 4 through tracks that come together into 2 tracks to go underneath the current concourse, you have to change some columns around. And then there's a possibility maybe of getting 2 more through tracks through if the concourse becomes smaller than what it is today. So yeah, they've looked at that. There's been a lot of work into this. So again, short of actually tearing down 3 or 4 buildings and really taking this project airport serious or major highway serious, I think they're coming to good conclusions. We just need to push harder and really make some of this stuff work.
A couple questions about nearby infrastructure. Eric asks, can the South Branch Viaduct be a tunnel instead?
Um, Probably, again, that's beyond my expertise, but they are looking at a new bridge. One of the challenges here in Chicago is um, this used to be a swamp, and there used to be lots of different things in lots of different places. So maybe it's not necessarily a good idea to dig a new tunnel under that river. I don't know. I do think that there needs to be a new shallow tunnel underneath Clinton so that you can run trains from the UP lines through. But again, that's beyond my expertise. I don't know.
Arnold asks, is the bridge construction along the Norfolk Southern near the Skyway Bridge related to a future south of the lake project?
I doubt it. I don't know.
Can anything be done to get more cooperation from the freight railroads in making some of the improvements that you've talked about today?
Yeah. And the first thing is you got to stop treating them as your opponent. Um, so I don't I don't care if it's the law. A lot of people interpret the law as saying the freight trains have to run passenger trains and not make a profit on. Yeah, that can be the law. It can be the law that I have to run my apartment building and not make a profit on it, but I'm not going to replace that apartment building when it's time to tear it down. Um, so the Capitol Corridor and Brightline are the model. You start with an aggressive plan to have high frequency service, and you go to the railroad as a true partner, and you say, what do we need to do to implement this plan and make it worth your while? That's what we need to do. This thing of trying to cram 2 trains a day at slow speeds without spending real money on infrastructure is not going to get us anywhere. So that's the answer. Treat them as real vendors. The same way that the federal government pays Boeing or Lockheed Martin or the state pays highway construction firms and they all make money. That's, sorry, it's an emotional issue for me.
Okay. On a sort of related note, another business question. Ellen asks, is there business support for high-speed rail in the Midwest?
Um, there is business support. We need to get it to business priority. But certainly, I think if you went and talked to any CEO in any, most CEOs, let's not say it's 100%. If you said to them, would you put your people on a train if it took 2 hours to get to Chicago and it was less than $50? Would you be in favor of that? They would say yes. Um, Now the question is, are they willing to put that on top of their priority for something else? And so right now, the state of Michigan, the um, the Speaker of the House is proposing to renege on tax breaks to corporations in order to fund highway construction. We should be part of that conversation saying to these companies, this is a lot less expensive if it's trains and not highways. And you get a lot more value out of it, it's trains and it's not highways. And get the CEOs moving from, yeah, I'd like to have this to, I'm willing to put political capital. And again, I believe a key to that is not talking about 2 trains a day, but talking about growing ridership by 10 times in 5 years. That's something that you can dig your teeth in to say, I'm going to put political capital into.
Okay. Well, let's make this the last question. I see we're over time now, but another Arnold asks, or first it's a comment, then a question. Arnold says, in Chicago, I sometimes spend as much time connecting between trains as I do for my trips. Security and accessibility are critical. What can we do to facilitate the political process within RTA and between intercity routes, the water taxi, parking, rideshare loading, CTA, Metra, and Amtrak to make this better?
I am sorry. Ask me the question again.
Okay. First, there was a comment in Chicago. I sometimes spend as much time connecting between trains as I do for my trips. Security and accessibility are critical. So what can we do to facilitate the political process within RTA and between intercity routes, the water taxi, parking, rideshare loading, CTA, Metra, and Amtrak to improve this?
So there's a political discussion happening right now in Illinois about what you do about transit development, what the governance structure is. And we need to be part of that discussion. So whatever ends up in the governance structure out of this debate, they need to be responsible for coordinating intercity travel within the 6 counties. So making those kinds of connections truly functional should be part of the remit of that entity, whatever that entity ends up being in the end of the day. Because with so many things with railways, it's the other guy's issue. Connections to O'Hare. You know, the airports would benefit, but the city needs to worry about. The city's like, yeah, we certainly would benefit, but downstate needs to think about it because the trains are coming from downstate, right? It just goes in a circle. So that's part of the governance issue that we need to deal with.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And Rick, do you have any concluding thoughts or anything else?
I don't. I just, thank you all for being here, and for those who are members, thank you very much for being members. If you're not a member, please hit our Become a Member button on the website, and share the Fix Chicago Union Station site far and wide. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.